The South China Sea looks peaceful enough from the surface, sparkling blue waters, fishing boats drifting, maybe even Instagram-worthy sunsets. But peel back that calm exterior, and what you've really got is one of the most dangerous geopolitical pressure cookers on Earth. Think less tropical paradise and more Game of Thrones, but with coast guards and coral reefs. For years, China has been playing the heavyweight bully in the region, waving around its so-called nine-dash line like a forged hall pass. And here's the kicker. The world's top court already shredded that claim back in 2016. The Hague basically told Beijing, nice map, but no. Did that stop China? Please. They doubled down, harassing Filipino sailors with lasers, blasting supply boats with water cannons, and swarming fishing grounds with maritime militias until locals have no choice but to pack up and leave. Now here comes the plot twist. The Philippines isn't backing down anymore. Under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Manila has drawn its own line in the water, refusing to let Beijing push it around. And just when China thought it had intimidated another neighbor into silence, in swoops an unexpected player from thousands of miles away, the European Union. Yep, Brussels has decided to roll up its sleeves and stand shoulder to shoulder with Manila. And before you shrug this off as another round of toothless diplomatic niceties, let me tell you, this time, Europe isn't just whispering from the sidelines. It's calling Beijing out, loudly. EU officials are flat out labeling China's tactics as illegal, coercive, aggressive, and dangerous. For a bloc usually famous for politely worded statements, that's basically Brussels picking up a megaphone and yelling. So why does Europe even care? Why throw its weight behind a nation halfway across the globe? The answer is simple, but it cuts deep. This isn't just about Filipino fishermen, rusting warships, or contested reefs. It's about something far bigger, the rules-based international order. You know, that whole framework of international law that keeps trade routes free, borders respected, and oceans from turning into anyone's backyard swimming pool. If China gets away with ignoring the Hague's ruling, it's not just Manila that loses. It's the entire idea of law over brute force, and the EU has skin in this game. Remember, 40% of Europe's trade passes through the South China Sea. If those shipping lanes turn into China's toll road, Brussels isn't just watching an Asian problem unfold. It's watching its own economy sail straight into trouble. That's why, in the past year, we've seen the EU-Philippines relationship shift gears. High-level talks that used to be cautiously polite are now blunt and fiery. Manila and Brussels have launched a formal security and defense dialogue, not just about reefs and fishing rights, but about cyber threats, disinformation, and foreign interference. In other words, this isn't a one-off handshake. It's the start of a deeper habit of cooperation, the kind of routine that eventually evolves into full-blown alliances. And here's where Europe plays to its strengths. It doesn't need to send a fleet of warships to prove its point. Europe's real weapon isn't firepower, it's legitimacy. Think back to past disputes. Chile versus the EU over swordfish, Ireland versus the UK over a nuclear plant. Europe didn't win those fights with missiles. It won them with legal weight, international institutions, and relentless diplomacy. That's the same strategy it's deploying now. Instead of framing this as China versus the Philippines, Brussels is reframing it as China versus international law. That's a nightmare scenario for Beijing. Why? Because the second this becomes a global issue instead of a local spat, China's narrative crumbles. It stops being about some tiny shoal in the middle of nowhere and becomes a test case for whether rules or raw power get to decide the future of the seas. Meanwhile, out on the waves, Filipino sailors are living this reality every single day. The BRP Sierra Madre, a rusting World War II-era ship grounded on the Second Thomas Shoal, is the front line. A handful of Marines are stationed there, holding out as a physical symbol of Manila's claim. Resupplying them has turned into something straight out of a high-stakes action movie. Chinese Coast Guard ships towering over much smaller Philippine vessels, unleashing water cannons, sometimes even ramming them outright. Videos of these encounters leave little doubt who the aggressor is, but Beijing just shrugs and denies everything. This is what experts call gray zone tactics. They're not acts of open war, but they're designed to slowly wear down resistance. It's the geopolitical version of turning up the pressure on a frog in boiling water. One day it's a fishing boat blocked. The next it's sailors blinded by lasers. Each act is small enough to avoid sparking a shooting war, but relentless enough to establish control. And this is where Europe's support starts to matter. On its own, the Philippines risks looking like David throwing pebbles at Goliath. But with the EU backing its case, Manila suddenly isn't just one country crying foul. It's part of a growing international chorus. The United States, Japan, Australia, Canada, and now the EU are amplifying its voice. Each new ally makes it harder for Beijing to dismiss the Philippines as a minor nuisance. But Europe's involvement does something even more important. It changes the framing of the entire conflict. No longer is this just an Asian quarrel about who controls which reef. It's now a global question of whether international law actually means anything. By anchoring its support in UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Brussels ensures this fight resonates far beyond the Pacific. And make no mistake, Filipinos feel the weight of this support. Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo has publicly thanked the EU for standing firm. For a country facing down one of the world's biggest powers on a daily basis, having Europe in its corner isn't just policy, it's a morale boost. It tells Filipinos they're not alone, that their struggle is seen and recognized on the world stage. But let's be clear, China hasn't taken Europe's involvement lightly. Beijing has fired back, telling Brussels to stay out of the South China Sea, as if this were some private backyard squabble, except it isn't. Not when the entire global order of free and open seas is on the line. Not when trillions of dollars in trade flow through those waters every year. And that's what makes this moment so significant. The EU stepping in means the Philippines' fight isn't just local anymore. It's global. It's no longer a battle over a reef you can barely spot on a map. It's about the principle of whether laws or raw power decide the fate of nations. Now here's where things get really tricky. Because while Europe's moral support feels good on paper, and even better in press releases, the big question hanging over all of this is, how far will Brussels actually go? It's one thing to issue statements and back Manila in international law. It's another thing entirely to keep that stance when China starts shaking the economic tree. Remember, China isn't just the big kid on the playground. It's also the storekeeper selling candy to everyone. The EU is one of Beijing's largest trading partners, and vice versa. European cars, machinery, luxury goods, they all need access to the Chinese market. And Beijing knows it. That's why experts are already warning of a wedge strategy, where China tempts certain European countries with business deals in exchange for toning down the tough talk. So the challenge for Brussels is crystal clear. Can it keep all 27 member states singing the same song when money starts talking? France might care about freedom of navigation, but what happens if Germany starts worrying about its auto exports? This internal tension could easily test Europe's unity. But here's the wild part. The EU seems to understand this risk, and instead of backing away, it's doubling down. By launching that security and defense dialogue with the Philippines, Brussels is signaling it's not treating this as some side project. It's weaving Manila into its broader Indo-Pacific strategy. And that's a huge shift. The Philippines isn't just another partner anymore. It's becoming the test case, the front line for how Europe plans to deal with Asia's rising tensions. And if this works, if the EU can actually back up Manila and hold its own against Chinese pressure, it sets a precedent that could spill over to Vietnam, Malaysia, and every other country staring down Beijing's maritime tactics. Suddenly, the South China Sea stops being a series of isolated disputes and becomes a united stand for international law. But let's not sugarcoat it. The risks are massive. Beijing has already shown it's willing to escalate when it feels cornered. More aggressive harassment at sea, more blockades, maybe even economic retaliation against European companies. Each water cannon blast isn't just a splash. It's a calculated message. Push us too far, and we'll push back harder. The scary part, none of this happens in isolation. The South China Sea isn't just about reefs and shoals. It's the highway of global trade. Around one-third of the world's maritime commerce passes through those waters. If Beijing manages to intimidate its neighbors into silence, it's not just Manila losing out, It's the principle of free navigation crumbling worldwide. Imagine a world where shipping routes come with Beijing's toll booth. That's the nightmare Europe is trying to prevent. And here's the thing, Brussels has done this before. Not in the South China Sea, but in other high-stakes disputes. Remember the Chilean swordfish saga? Or the MOX nuclear plant case between Ireland and the UK? Europe didn't storm in with military might. It reframed the fights, put them into the language of law, dragged them onto the global stage, and pressured everyone until compliance was the only option left. That's the same playbook we're watching unfold today. Because let's be honest, Europe isn't about to park aircraft carriers next to Chinese destroyers. That's just not its style. Instead, it projects power through institutions, diplomacy, and persistence. No instant fireworks, but steady, grinding influence that eventually reshapes the game. And Beijing knows that's dangerous. Military force can be countered with military force, but legitimacy, global consensus, that's much harder to fight against. Which brings us back to the Philippines. For ordinary Filipinos, Europe's support is more than just geopolitics. It's reassurance. It's proof that their daily struggles, fishermen harassed at sea, Marines holding out on a rusting ship, sailors braving water cannons, aren't invisible to the world. It's proof that their fight isn't just about tiny reefs, but about something bigger: freedom, sovereignty, and the idea that the law matters. And yet, the future remains uncertain. Will Brussels resolve hold if Beijing turns up the economic heat? Will every EU member stay aligned, or will cracks start to show? Will China's gray zone tactics escalate into something more dangerous, inching the region closer to a flashpoint? What's undeniable is this: by stepping in, Europe has raised the stakes. The South China Sea is no longer just an Asian dispute. It's now a global test of whether the rules-based order survives the 21st century. And the Philippines, once a small player in a very big game, suddenly finds itself at the center of that test. So the next time you see footage of Chinese Coast Guard ships blasting Filipino resupply boats, don't just think of it as a regional squabble. Think of it as the frontline battle for the future of international law. Manila isn't standing alone anymore. Behind it stands not just the US, Japan, or Australia, but now the European Union too. And that right there changes everything. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about the Philippines. It isn't just about China. It's about whether the world decides to live by rules or by force. And if Europe and Manila can prove that law still holds power over raw muscle, then the South China Sea might just be the place where the global order takes its stand. So whether you're in Brussels, Manila, or halfway across the world, here's the takeaway. Don't blink. What happens out there on those waters could reshape the balance of power for decades to come. And if you want to keep unpacking how these global shifts ripple into our future, stick around, hit that subscribe button, and join us here every week. Because trust me, the waves in the South China Sea, they're only just getting started.